turn it over to Leanne.
Okay, I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and you can see the original title. So I'll also, can I move around? Okay. So I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Leanne. I'm the User Experience and Digital Scholarship Librarian at Middlebury, and I was also the library project lead on our website redesign, which launched as of June 2019. And so I left my contact information, and I'd be happy to share the slides. They have a bunch of links in them for future reference if anyone's interested. And I wanted to start by asking if anyone has questions that they're specifically looking for answers to, or if there's something in particular that you're here for, if you're thinking about a redesign, in the middle of one, just finished 5 years ago. So feel free to add any questions in the chat now, and I will take a look and see what I can do to make sure I hit all of those points as I'm going along. So I'll just keep an eye on that. If you do have specific questions, feel free to pop them in, and I'll either get to them now or there's plenty of time at the end. Okay. So I'll start by reviewing our project process, the entire website that we worked on, and then I'll talk about the different techniques I wanted to implement to make sure that there was continued ownership and a maintenance plan to move forward and make sure that the site itself was never just presented and then left and dropped away. So a couple important things to know about our project is that we were working as part of an institutional redesign. So the overall Middlebury College website is being redesigned, and it's being led by the communications and marketing team. So we are working in a Drupal environment, and we also decided as a library that we wanted to have particular ownership over our site, because unlike most of the college pages, it's not a marketing site. We realized that our users are really active users of the college community, and we didn't want communications to take over and create like a marketing heavy library website. We really wanted it to be practical and functional. So that was a key rationale for our group to decide to become more heavily involved than really was required from the marketing department. So our team that started working on the project was there was a library contingent, which was led by myself, and we also have a website user experience group that has members of each work group of our library. So it's a good representative group. We already met monthly to talk about usability issues in our digital services, as well as other kind of like small scale projects where we were updating digital content. So then there was also the communications team, and this is the large scale college communications work, and they were really driving the project at an institutional level. And they also worked together with me to allow the library a little bit more control over the content creation process and the design of the site. We also worked with our information technology services. So they helped with some of the technical support, as well as creating customized and integrated features that helped create the functionality of the site so that it really could function as a search. So we could have active searching in our site and integrate with some of our other platforms like LibGuides or SpringShare. And so just as something to see, this is what the site looked like originally when I started. And I think this design was from 2008 was the how long it had been live for. And I also just wanted to point out that we had the URL slug of middlebury.edu/academic/library. And I really wanted to make sure we could, or I wanted to advocate to push to be a top level navigation level. So that meant moving from academics into our own level. So that would made our future site middlebury.edu/library. All right, so into the project itself. So we kind of worked under 4 phases. The first phase being a planning phase, where we kind of collected model sites. There were usability studies done, and several before I arrived as well. And then we identified both staff stakeholders, so folks that would be working on the website as it was both being redesigned and throughout its life cycle. And then also our stakeholders who are our patrons or users, so our students, faculty, and staff. And then I conducted stakeholder interviews with all of our staff to make sure that we would hit a usability level between the backend so that everyone who was required to work on the library website would be able to, and it would meet their needs. The next phase was this kind of structural phase where we decided which content we would be using, how to organize it within the website, and then created an overall site map that met our new and future needs. The third phase is our content phase, where after we had the structure of the site set up, we then moved into revising existing content and writing new content for a content guide that I wrote and shared with all of our team editors. And then the final phase was the launch, which I kind of consider still active, which included training for all of the new editors, adding additional components and pages, and then the continued maintenance plans. So phase one, planning, largely happened between October and December of 2018. And the main things that we did during this period were researching model library websites, which was, there were several that had already, I came into the library with some of this work being done, like finding model sites. And then identifying the stakeholders, like I mentioned, interviewing them, which is something I came into every work group during like a monthly meeting or something and asked all of these questions that I'll share in a second. And then we also conducted a platform audit, and at the end of the day, or at the end of the phase, had finished goals for the site and an intended audience. So the stakeholder interviews I won't read, but again, you can have the slides once we're done. But like I said, I came into every staff meeting and asked all these questions. And then we developed the goals based on a lot of the answers to the questions. The platform map. So this was important because we didn't want any of our existing integrations to break as we transferred to a new Drupal site. So we mapped out how all of our third-party services integrate into Drupal. And it might not make sense if you're not like familiar with Middlebury's specific concept, but the idea being it's important to know what links into what so that you can not break it when you move sites, or make sure that like all of your libapps integrations come with you when you move platforms. So that was an important thing that we used. The web UX team helped me create this, and then we brought it to communications to make sure that they understood all the sort of like fine details of how we were working together. And then we came up with an audience. So like I had said earlier, we wanted enrolled students and current faculty and staff to be our main primary audience, with a secondary audience of library guests, visitors, or possibly prospective students and faculty. And that's because one of the guiding factors was to make sure that anyone who comes to the site isn't immediately lost in like library jargon or something too specific to Middlebury. I wanted to make sure that anyone who visited the site could understand what they were seeing as they opened the website, and wouldn't have to be an expert library user to understand our content. And so at the end of the planning phase, we came out with 4 main goals, which were to create a mobile-first, aesthetically pleasing and intuitive library website with a simple WYSIWYG backend editor so that our staff could easily update and create new content. We wanted to use a consistent voice with a predictable format. Previously, the site had a lot of editors and a lot of repeated information and various ways of referring to the same thing. So we wanted to make sure we created a consistent way to refer to information, and for all of our pages to have a really predictable format so a user could go to any one page and feel comfortable finding the information they needed to find. And fourth, we wanted to be able to integrate those custom features like our Spring Share integrations or using advanced search directly through our site. So we wanted to make sure we had access to custom components and features. So the second phase was the structural phase. So this was coming up with a content audit, which was actually for us done by the communications group, which was really great. And I'll just show what I mean by that. So the content audit was a master list of every page that had been written on the, this is just an example, every page that had been written on our original website, and it gave us this some other information about like how many clicks had the page had and what the content title was. So I then decided to assign every page to a different library staff member, occasionally more than one person. But for the most part, this was like the first step in creating ownership over each page and making sure that the content was not lost or dropped. So once a person had been assigned to content title, they were then in charge of deciding whether that page from the old site should be kept, removed, or altered. And at that point, we were able to have a master list of what content titles would be, so what the page titles would be. And we were able to delete like hundreds of pages from the original site, which is really great and helped us create that kind of consistent and easier to follow voice. So the content audit was completed and then let us know what all of the page titles would be for the new site. And at that point, we did a card sort, which is a user experience technique that allows, I used a digital format called Optimal Workshop. You could purchase a single study and have users participate in a test. And basically what happens is you use all of the titles of your future website pages and you ask participants to sort them into groups. So this tree kind of shows the most common sorting methods of other users. So we had all of the library staff participate in this test, as well as faculty and some students. So I wanted to get a range of answers for how we would organize the information. And the idea here is once you have this kind of like analysis from, you don't need to use Optimal Workshop, but it does provide the analysis, which can be really helpful, and it will eventually allow you to understand where you want to include each page under the navigation. So it allows you to create the architecture of the site. And what I did after we got the card sort analysis back, I created a just like a mind map of our proposed structure. And this is what I shared with communications to make sure that we were all on the same page as to what our services, what our information architecture would look like for the new site. And then once we had the structure for the site, we were ready to start creating new content, which is the third section. And we did this from about February to April, but I'd say this is the kind of work that is still being complete or still being actively done as we go. So the content, I first created a content guide, and this was based on MailChimp has a really great content guide, as well as 18F, which is a government organization. And I wanted to create a shared document that would guide our writers and authors to create consistent information, like to create a consistent voice for our information, so that no matter who is writing our content, because I knew we'd have multiple editors, it would all kind of sound similar and have a cohesive written structure. So that was really important to me. And because I think it's so important, I'm going to run through some of the key aspects of the guide. And I also am happy I have a link to it in the next slide. So let's start at the top. So I have just navigation at the top. And I started by creating some sample personas for our proposed audience, which are a first-year student, a junior student, an expert student, tenured faculty, new faculty, and then finally a visitor. And these are just examples of people that might be using our library website. And then after that, I created a standardized page structure so that every page has these 3 elements, or at least could if you're creating a new page. And that way, users who come to the site are familiar with the structure and see something repeated over and over again and kind of have a better idea of what to expect as they come to our site. And then after the structure is the actual guide itself. And this is what is mostly adapted from the MailChimp company style guide in 18F, which I have linked at the bottom. So I created like a goal for the content guide, which or for our libraries, like web content at large. And so my goals are to have clear content with user-centered language and accessible, like web accessible features. So everything that we write should be accessible. It should be for all users. Anyone who opens a page should be able to understand it. And our language should refer to our standards. So I created a name authority, which is listed at the bottom, and I'll get to it in a second. So there's goals, principles, which were concise, accessible, intuitive, pretty much the same. And then also we say, and then how we say it. So we wanted to we wanted our voice to be academic, expert, but also approachable. And then our tone to be formal and professional. So there's kind of like we want people to be able to come to us, but we also want to be experts in our fields. And then this is more guidelines for creating new content. So if you wanted to add a new page, there's an approval process, whereas previously anyone could add a new page as they saw fit. And that's kind of how we got to so many pages on the original site. And then there's also information for revising existing content to make sure that only page authors are directly revising their content with that, or an individual gets permission from that page author to make a revision. And then there's a section on formatting content, which is largely to create an accessible site. So writing for web can be tricky because you want to make sure that you're writing not only for a reader, but also for a screen reader, and to make sure that you're using the most accessible formats. So emphasis, I wanted to make sure only bold text was used, make sure that we use headers when we're starting new sections in our site. And then I also feel pretty strongly about trying to limit abbreviations and acronyms, and when they're used, make sure they're spelled out on every single page. So I feel like a lot of library folks end up with a million acronyms, and to make sure that every time an acronym is used, it's first introduced somewhere on that page to make sure that anyone who comes to the page is aware of what the acronym really stands for. And the same kind of goes for jargon, or I guess in this case, MIPCA is kind of an acronym, but understanding that not everyone might know what our library catalog is called. So the first time you refer to it, making sure you call it, you describe it as well. And finally, there's a section on links to make sure that links are formatted correctly, especially for accessibility, but also that they're used appropriately. And the last section is for images. And now in Drupal 8 that we have, every image must have alt text by design. So you can't add an image without writing alt text, but there is, I did want to provide more information about alt text in case someone wasn't sure. Finally is the name authority that I mentioned. And this is a living document, and it does change over time, but it's the most up-to-date version of what we call proper nouns in our library. So a good example would be ebook. This is a decision that I made in conjunction with the Web UX group, and we decided to use e-book because it's read easily by a screen reader, even though a lot of our vendors use ebook to the variety of spellings. So that was a decision we made, and now all of our written web content uses e-book. And so this is something that can be referred to at any point in time. We use GoLinks at Middlebury, and there's a GoLink for it. It's in our shared drive, and there's also now a bitlink that I will move to. So that was an important part of the content creation, is I wanted to have a lot of structure in place so anyone who is writing content could refer back to the best practices to make sure that all of our content is concise and consistent. This is the bitlink for the content guide if anyone's interested. And then the second half of the content phase was actually writing the content. So the communication team helped us set up a bunch of Google Docs that followed the structure that we had designed, so the information architecture. And I took the assignments from the content audit and asked those individuals to write or revise the content that they wanted on their site. And I also at this point, made a list of all of the content authors. I wanted to keep track of them and make sure I knew what pages they were responsible for. So I use Airtable, but a spreadsheet would be excellent as well. So as they were writing, I would send assignments or check up on them and make sure that they were aware that they were responsible for their pages and which part of the assignment we were in. And then after all the content was drafted in Google Docs, it then went through a public, like a library staff public revision phase where anyone in the library was able to review the content and make comments and suggestions in Google. And then I cleaned up all the comments after that part was complete and sent it to communications who were able to put it into Drupal in like a bulk upload. So that saved us a lot of time and effort as well. But I do recommend using Google to draft all the content. It made it really easy to get input and make quick changes. And the formatting translates, at least for us. So then we got to the final phase, which was the launch phase. And that, I think the site went live in early June 2019. And overall, during this part, we did editor training. So there were 14 editors at the beginning of the launch. And so communications helped onboard all of the editors to give them privileges, and then also hosted an editor training. And I've done several trainings since as we get both new people or new features. I created this page ownership spreadsheet where I keep track of all the pages that we have and who owns them. And then I also have the reverse of it, which is pages and their information. Just pick one. So it has the page name, the URL, where it's located in our navigation, and then who's responsible for it. I also this year added this edited for COVID column, which really helped me because I now know every page that's been edited with updated content for COVID or anywhere our policies have changed. So at the beginning and end of every semester, which is when our library policies have changed, I've been able to ask individual editors to make sure that they're updating their content along with our policies. So that's one real life example that's been really helpful, is to have a really clear idea of who is responsible for which content and making sure it gets updated. We also do regular ongoing maintenance. So I will schedule with all of the web editors that have been assigned. I schedule at least 2 meetings a year, which are kind of like drop-in meetings. And I ask everyone to come to the meeting with me in Zoom or in person and just review all the pages they're responsible for, and then just make sure whatever is there is up to date. And so that's one key way that I make sure the content on the site stays up to date all year long. We've also added additional pages since the site went live. So initially we had an outside blog in WordPress, and so did our special collections. And since the original launch in June, we were able to work with a Drupal news outlet, or a news component. So now we have an internal blog in Drupal. All of our content is there, and special collections is able to use that content too. And then we've also have customizations that we're working on with our ITS group. So we're trying to improve the site. I'll show an image of what it looks like now, but there's some things that I'm actively working on, like decreasing the size of our jumbo image. And then within the next year, we've been hoping to work on the search widget, which is technically is the exact same as it was on the original site. It just has an updated look. So we're hoping to improve some of the technical parts. And we also have a clear idea of who manages what. So the library is in charge of all of the written content and imagery. We also control the organization, so the structure of the content, where it lives on the site, and then again, the standards and practices. So having that content guide really is our standards. There are Middlebury institutional standards that are sort of built into the guide that I wrote, but largely it only pertains to us, especially if the name authority is a library specific document. And then communications and ITS, they control the design and layout, they add new components, and they also manage the backend editor, so they can control privileges for different authors and different levels of permissions. And so here are the results. This is what the site looks like actively. Like I was saying, that jumbo image is quite large, and I'm hoping to shrink it down a little bit to make it more useful as you first land on the page. But overall, we're quite happy with it. This is just if you were to scroll down, you would see some of the more dynamic components we were able to add from the original site to here, where we're able to use these call to actions. And then below is the library news that Mike added in the chat if you want to check it out. Oh, and I was able to make that top level navigation. So we're middlebury.edu/library, which isn't like a huge change, but I think really does make a big difference in saying that we support all aspects of the college, not just academia. And so here's some jumbo numbers. So we at launch, we're at 155 pages, which was down from 346 on the old site. And then we had 14 trained editors from 28. So that both of those like numbers really just help with the clarity and consistency, and then that like concise voice. To be able to have 14 people instead of 28 really allows the content that we're writing to be more uniform, less kind of ad hoc, and just more controlled. I have a good grasp on who runs what. And then that final number, 9.1, is the site's ratings, the site's rating for the Flesch-Kincaid grade level. And that is saying like freshman year of high school is the reading level of the site, which is an improvement from the original old site. And so this is just in review what the project looked like. We had the redesign portion was a planning stage where we identified stakeholders, goals, and audience, a structural phase where we reviewed the content that we had existing, decided what we wanted to keep, remove, or alter, and then created a new structure for all that content to live in. The content phase was creating the content guide and sharing it with staff, and then revising existing pages or writing new content. Launching the site was the final phase where we worked on training staff to make sure everyone understood how to use the new editor, going live with the site, and then creating an expectation for continued maintenance, which is the right-hand side of this slide. So the content portion of the site is something that I consider to be continuously ongoing, and we review it at least twice a year. There's a approval process to create any new pages so that there's no creep of that like 345 pages is just too many. But with the approval process, only pages that are widely approved by staff get accepted into the site. And then one thing that I think is really great is we have at least 4 to 5 news stories that are posted to the site per month. And that's between the library at large and special collections. And that I think just helps keep audience engaged, provides brand new content that's interesting and exciting and isn't as purely informative or structural as most of our sites. And then the final component to the ongoing work is technical. So we have updates to custom components. So those are, we got the news story. We are constantly, as the institution goes through the redesign process, they create new components that then get shared with us, and we can revise the way that our content is displayed to fit in some of those more dynamic, interesting components. And then we also have some of the project requests, which include like shrinking down the jumbo image, which I'll just navigate to so you can see just how big it is. Shrinking this down or revising our search so that it's updated along with the rest of our site. And that is the project in review, and I'd love to take any questions. Feel free to raise your hand or stop by the chat. Carrie.
Hi. Oh, hi. I do have a camera, but I guess I covered it up. Hello. So you talked in the, hi Leanne, hi Mike. I'm at Middlebury too, everyone. Leanne, you mentioned in the beginning in the planning process, you talked with stakeholders and identified goals. I wonder if you could talk about how you set expectations for that time when you know there may be competing expectations with goals that kind of clash, like maybe how much detail we put in there, that kind of thing. If you talk about how you set expectations for how you might negotiate potential disagreement between stakeholders.
That's a tough one. I think ultimately one thing I did before we really got started was kind of create authority around that website UX group. So I wanted to make sure that I wanted feedback and participation from all of the library staff, but I also wanted everyone to know that ultimately the UX team would make the decision and everyone who used the website would also carry along with our choices. So that allowed us to kind of balance what individuals wanted versus what we thought was most accessible or most usable or best for the most amount of people. So that helped.
Leanne, there's a question in the chat wondering what was the timeline from planning to launch?
So I think I wrote in the description that it was 6 months, and it was definitely longer than that because it was September. I think late September is when it started and we launched in June. So probably closer to 9 months. And it wasn't all active work, but it was kind of a consistent task throughout our.
And a follow-up question is how much time per month do maintenance efforts take?
It depends on who you are. So I probably spend, I don't know, a good 4 or 5 hours a month, I think, on maintenance, but there are certain times of the year when there's more maintenance. So I tend to be the one, I'm like, still consider myself sort of the lead on the website or the project manager, where I will request staff to join me in one of those editor sessions, or I will specifically reach out and ask someone to make a change if there's something outdated that I just happen to notice. So it's certainly more hours on me, but I think for most of our staff, maybe 2 hours a month, not much. Howard?
Yeah, could you talk about how the library has adapted to so much more online tools for learning, and maybe more of a role for the library connecting departments to each other, things like that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, let's see, I'll just hop over there. I think like we were already connected in the original site through the academics page. And the library's the college's final website, their homepage is the last thing to be redesigned. So it'll be middlebury.edu will be the last thing that's done as a whole. So I'm not sure where they're going to put us in the ultimate structure, but I do think having that kind of like higher level, a bit like URL that makes us an equal place on the site, sort of gives us some more, I'm going to say clout, but I feel like it makes us easier to find for students and has improved just the overall ability to see the website. As far as connecting to other like third party situations, or like our Spring Share, we have almost all of the same integrations, but they look better now. So I think there's just given the times, like it was time for a visual update as well, but all of our functionality and third party, like, so all of our guides link the same way, and all of our like our search features are all the same. They just look nicer. I don't know if that helped.
I think maybe behind the question is also a question about how did we, when we had to go online and do much less in person. And I think that we actually were pretty well prepared for that because we'd already made a lot of those transitions a decade earlier. So it wasn't as if the case we were like an analog library and then COVID hit and we had to make this huge pivot. We had most of the infrastructure and services and expertise already resident to operate in that mode. So it wasn't it wasn't terribly hard to, I mean, there was lots of other things that were really hard, but I think we were pretty well prepared in terms of having the infrastructure. And I'll say that the website was really helpful in terms of just being able to communicate all of the changes that we had to make, that having that really nice, clear news feed right in the center and the ability to stick content right on the homepage and have it remain there was incredibly helpful.
I see a question in the chat that says, have you found a good way to get student/user feedback? And I have two recommendations. The first is something that we used to do in person, which we haven't been in person for a while, but I'll buy coffee cards or like a gift card to our cafe in the library, and I will ask students just who are walking by to spend 5 minutes with me doing a usability test. That's been quite successful, and I actually had really good success this year on Zoom. I feel like it's to do a longer study, like more like 15 to 20 minutes. And I think it was easier for students to commit to visiting, like dropping into my Zoom room. And I also gave them a $5 gift card to a coffee shop in town as a compensation, but it was, I had like filled my spots in record time. So I think maybe the low barrier of Zoom rather than meeting in my office in person, and then the high incentive of like a fancy local coffee shop was a really good combo.
Well, we have 22 minutes left. Leanne and I talked about this ahead of time, and if we feel like we've learned what we need to learn, that's fine. But I do want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions if people have other questions or comments or want to talk about their own experience trying to figure out a way to make website maintenance sustainable and manageable. That would be interesting too.
Mike, I had one question. This isn't for my library, but I've seen it at some other libraries. It's come up recently. Many of our public libraries are part of larger municipalities and therefore have to figure out that sort of power dynamic. And it sounded like you also had some negotiations with Middlebury, like with the URL work. And I'm just curious if you have additional tips regarding that, making that work.
I think for me, I tried to start by doing research and understanding why I wanted those certain things. And then I would actually give them to Mike and say, Mike, you're the powerful one, and I'd love if you could make this argument to the communications team. And usually that worked really well. I think that double hit of having usability science to back it up and then Mike presenting it was really successful for us, especially kind of getting the control. I think that was something communications was kind of happy to give us because it meant less work for their team. And they knew that this site was particularly complicated and also had those different purposes. I think at a town site, those purposes are closer together. They're a more similar, all the web pages are sort of in a more similar vein, but you do have that particular functionality of making sure someone can find the Koha catalog or be able to have those specific functionalities. So I think being clear about what your needs are at the beginning also helps. That platform map that I showed, I think also showed that we knew our stuff, we knew what we were connecting and we knew that we needed it to be a certain way or it wouldn't work.
And I think, one of the other differences I imagine between colleges and universities and towns is that colleges and universities invest really heavily in communications teams because it's their main marketing function at this point. And so it was also easier for us to work with this pretty sophisticated communications and marketing team that exists at the college. And based on my own experience living in Middlebury, they just, Middlebury doesn't have this kind of, the town of Middlebury does not invest in building that kind of marketing and communications service. And so there's a way in which I imagine as a public library that you're more on your own in terms of resources, whereas we benefit a lot from being able to work with this sophisticated, well-resourced marketing and communications outfit. But it also means that we have more, that we have to make our case. Like, they're not going to let us just do whatever we want, because they also are data driven and have certain goals.
And there were definitely also like hard lines, like the structure of the site was non-negotiable. The like design of the site was non-negotiable. So there were a lot of like places we were able to kind of creep in and make what we wanted happen. But then there were some things that were just from the get-go never on the table.
And Leanne, I see in the chat that people are asking for links. If you have links to anything, you can send them to me, and then we can put them on the program site, so people could just have a way to get to them from there.
I'll see if I can find a link to the model sites. I'm not sure where that's living right now, but I definitely have the slides. I'll paste in now, just in case anyone's interested. And I can look around for anything else that I might have mentioned.
Well, we could treat this like a Quaker meeting and sit in silence for another 17 minutes until the spirit moves, or oh, here we go. We have another question.
I think that's kind of tough. The question is, what would you say are the top things to avoid when redesigning? I think that's a tough question to answer. I feel like the top things, I tried to avoid too many hands in the pot. I wanted to make sure everyone was involved, but that at the end of the day, there was like a process to move forward, and that there was someone like kind of leading the project. I think that's really important, to have a single person in charge, and who can, maybe not in charge, but leading the project to make sure things are on track, and also to make tougher decisions. But I think it's tough to say like what are top things to avoid. I would avoid, like inaccessible language, inaccessible content, poor links, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I think it's easier to say what you would want as a good thing rather than as a bad thing. I'm not really sure. Thanks.
Yeah, I would say, just from having done this before Leanne got here, I was involved in the redesign of the design that she got rid of. And some of it, I think, is also just being like wildly ambitious and not paying attention to what resources you actually have available to maintain it. And so we're like, oh, sure, let's make 1,000 pages, because that's what we really need, and not really thinking through like, oh, for every page that you make, somebody's going to have to come back and look at it to see if it's still up to date and relevant. So I think there's a way to avoid, I mean, I think it seems odd, like, don't be ambitious is not really the message, but, be reasonable about what you can actually accomplish.
Yeah, I think maybe one other thing to avoid would be too many editors. So like on one of the slides, I had the original number of editors, which was 28, and I think there are 35 staff members-ish, Mike might know, but it was too many editors. So I think that's another thing that you might want to cut down, is it, along with having a single leader, have a smaller number of actual editors. And for any changes, to if someone isn't an editor but wants to change parts of the website, it would be have them email you or have them contact you, they can send you the copy and then you make the change. And that way you're clear on who is actually making changes and things aren't just happening without anyone knowing.
And I mean, another thing I'm just thinking about the process with Leanne, another thing that I think we're not doing as much of anymore is we used to just make little microsites using WordPress. So we didn't like the site that we had. And so we would just create random little websites to do something very specific. And so we ended up with just, there was no consistency in terms of design and look and feel and navigability. And so I think there's a, you know, resisting the temptation to sort of go outside of the constraints of whatever you're using because you're frustrated. So I think just learning to live with some of the limitations that the system that you're using has in order to have it all, to the extent possible, self-contained within a single space rather than spinning up, you know, dozens of these little microsites. And so part of the project that we're undertaking right now is sort of reeling in all of the microsites that we've made over the years and trying to make them fit within the framework that we have.
Yeah, I just finished adding a new one in, so I think we're almost done.
Okay, well, I feel like it is, we're down to 15 people. 3 of them are from Middlebury, and we can talk to each other whenever we want. So I guess I will say, I'll call one last call for final questions. And hearing none, I will thank Leanne very much for a fabulous presentation.
Thank you. And feel free to email me if questions do come up. I left my email in the slides. Thank you.